Hello, I'm SimpleAttack. About a month ago, I sat down and decided that I wanted to find out what every single Dragon Ball game ever was ranked, and then combined all these rankings into one mega list. The reason it's taken me a month to make this video is because I have ADHD. Now, before we get into it, there's a couple things I want to go over. 1, what are the best Dragon Ball games? 2, what are the worst Dragon Ball games, according to user scores? 3, how did I make the list itself? Like, what's the criteria that went into this list for it to be even remotely valid? I'm glad you asked, because I'm going to go over all these things. And then I'm also going to be posting the list in my Discord and as well as on Reddit, and I'll leave those links below so that way you can look at the list yourself and, you know, have a bit of a gander at the interesting significance of what everyone has ranked these games over the years. And the reason I say everyone is because I kind of grabbed so many different sources that it's the unanimous decision, this is what the game is scored. How I made the list. I went onto Wikipedia, I found a list of every Dragon Ball game ever. I just started putting that into my list. So I copy and pasted everything, found out what system it was for. I went through the initial home console games, because I believe that's how the list works. And then it had handheld games. And then I believe it had arcade games and maybe a couple other versions, but I didn't count those. I think the only 2 exceptions being Dokkan and Legends. And then once I had the list, I was like, okay, well, what happens if I look up X game score? And then on Google, I tend to find a few results that kept popping up. So I went off these as the main score indicators for everything. We have IGN user score, Metacritic critic scores, Metacritic user scores, GameSpot user scores, Nintendo Life scores, and IMDb scores. So we have a good 7 score rankings as our foundation for this experiment. So I went and painstakingly, I searched every single game on all of these different websites. And once I had all the scores, I put them into an Excel spreadsheet and I averaged them out. Now, let me just go over a couple of the websites themselves. So 1, the reason we are using IGN scores is because most of the time when you look up a score for something, you're gonna get the IGN score come up anyway. And despite that only being rated by 1 reviewer, I still think it's kind of relevant to the day and age that we're in, where if you look up a game, you're probably going to get an IGN score. Then you've got the IGN user scores, which most of the time there's a fair few users that will actually put the score in for it to even have that as an option. So, you know, that kind of balances itself out a little bit, I guess. Then we have Metacritic critic scores, Metacritic user scores, and with the Metacritic stuff, it's kind of a little bit funny because critic scores were out of 100. Anything that was 100, I just converted to an out of 10 score, despite the fact that I kind of like an out of 100 score better, but it's simpler for the sake of listing. I also think putting a point in a score is stupid and redundant. Like, just give it a solid number, 1 from 10. Simple as that. Doesn't matter. Besides the point. When going off Metacritic though, every version of a game that was released on a different console counts as a different score. So in my spreadsheet, I wrote all of the scores as an average. For example, you've got Budokai Tenkaichi 3 that was released on PS2 and the Wii. How I come up to the score with that on Metacritic is it would have the critic score for one game and the critic score for the other. I just found their average, put that as the average critic score for that game. Repeated the process for every one of them, including the user score. Next we have GameSpot. GameSpot do have individual reviewer scores, from critics, I guess. However, I just based it off the user scores that GameSpot provided. Then we have Nintendo Life. I felt like it was kind of relevant just purely based off the fact that any Dragon Ball game that released on a Nintendo device, for someone to rate it, it just kind of gives it a fair standing if it's something that was not a motion game and then was converted to a motion game. I feel like it just gives it that nicer average, and anyone who's willing to write a score on Nintendo Life, hey, look, I may as well chuck it in there, why not? And then the last one that kind of surprised me was IMDb actually had a lot of scores for this, so hey, we chucked in IMDb as well. Why did I say it that way? Why did I keep saying IMDb? So once we have all these scores, boom, we average out and get our final score from there. However, I ran into a bit of an issue after doing this for a while, because then I realized some of the GameSpot scores, even if something had a user ranking, it would have a ranking, but it wouldn't have how many people ranked it. So for fairness, I made a full list and a limited list, and we're going to be going off the limited list for this one. So I believe the game needed to have it had to acknowledge at least 20 plus people reviewed that game for it to even qualify in this list, because there's a fair few cases of certain games that were only reviewed on GameSpot. However, for whatever reason, it didn't give me an indicator of how many people reviewed it. So in the fairness of it, not wanting it to just be one person who reviewed it and then that gets the best game score, just purely based off the fact that, you know, maybe one guy rated it a 10 out of 10. But again, links are going to be to the full complete lists with those organizations from there. And just for a bit of transparency before we go through the best and the worst, I want to let you know that in the full list, average score was 7.1 of all the reviews. Like, just as an overall, Dragon Ball games are 7.1 in the full list. And then in the more limited list, where I took out some of the ones that I couldn't justifiably put in there because I didn't know how many people reviewed it, we have an average of 6.9. So again, Dragon Ball games average around a 7 score, which is generally good. At least I think I saw a review somewhere where IGN, their version of good is a 7. Like, that is like a passable game, which I kind of can agree on. So quickly, let's check out some honorable mentions. Firstly, we have Dragon Ball Online, and then Dragon Ball Irenaru Son Goku Densetsu. I think I didn't butcher that completely. I don't know, I could be wrong. Those are going to be honorable mentions because in the full list, that was the Dragon Ball Online was first and the Densetsu game was second respectively. However, I didn't have enough information to go off if this was a valid way to score them, because again, I couldn't show how many people actually rated these games. It could have just been one dude gave them a really high score, because Dragon Ball Online had a score of 9.6 on GameSpot on the user scoring, but it might have just been one user, I don't know. And the Densetsu game had an 8.6, which again, I don't actually know how many people rated it. So, you know, take that as you will. Honorable mentions out there. If you played these games, let us know. You know, are they actually that good? I know Dragon Ball Online doesn't actually exist anymore, but there might be a couple private servers running around, you know, here and there. All right, with that out of the way, let's talk about what the worst Dragon Ball games are. In the third worst Dragon Ball game ever, according to all the scores in the limited list, we have Dragon Ball Z Taiketsu. It has a score of 4.2. It was released in 2003 in the USA and 2004 in the EU for the Game Boy Advance, developed by Webfoot Technologies. It's a fighting game. The story is like an arcade type game, and it doesn't belong to any other series of games. Luckily, this was a one and done. They tried this game. It got a lot of bad reception. They didn't make any more of this. I remember emulating this one once when I was like real little. Yeah, it's a bad game. I think Globku recently did a tournament for it, which is kind of entertaining to watch. So I'll also like put a link for that somewhere. If you want to see a bunch of like actual good fighting game players play this atrocious game.
You can see him whiffing because he's...
They're both trying to do the inputs. They're both trying.
The second worst Dragon Ball game ever is Dragon Ball Z for the Kinect at a score of 3.5 over, again, the entirety of this list. It was released in 2012 for the Xbox 360. It was developed by Spike. It's a fighting game slash motion fighting game. It covers the Saiyan Saga through Buu Saga in story, and it doesn't belong to any series of games. However, it does use the graphics from Ultimate Tenkaichi. I do own this game, but I've never actually played it personally because I don't own a Kinect. But then again, if the reviews are to go off anything, I'm not missing out on much. As for the worst rated Dragon Ball game ever, Dragon Ball Evolution. It has a score of 2.3. It was released in 2009 for the PlayStation Portable by the developer Dimps. It's a fighting game, and the story is based off the Evolution movie, and it's part of the Budokai series. Now, this one kind of took me by surprise. I know everyone hates Dragon Ball Evolution. There's, you know, not much more to say about that. It was a bad movie. It was a stupid cash grab. They had the two actors from Shameless that, like, just, it doesn't make sense in hindsight why they did it the way they did it. But anyway, we all know Dragon Ball Evolution sucked. But this game sucking kind of confuses me, because obviously the story being based off the movie, fair enough if that's bad, but they could have redeemed it a little bit. I've never played this, so I've got actually like no full standing here. But it's part of the Budokai series. Like, it's the same engine that Budokai 1, 2, 3, Infinite World, all those ones run off, and they're all, you know, relatively well-received games. So it's so interesting that this good system couldn't even like prevent this game from going just straight down to the bottom because its source material just sucked. Now, let's look at the 3 best games real quick. So, in number 3 spot, we have Dragon Ball Z Legacy of Goku 2 with a score of 8. It was released in 2003 for the Game Boy Advance by Webfoot Technologies. Hey, one of the guys that made one of the worst games made one of the best games. That's kind of interesting. It's an action RPG that covers the Cell Saga / Android Saga, and it belongs to the Legacy of Goku series. I actually played these games out of order personally. I have played this one, I own this one, I love this one. But I personally am more of a fan of Buu's Fury, which I believe placed 5 or 6. So that game's also up there, and it was as well received as I thought it was. However, this one just stands out a little bit more. I think the reason why is because it's a little bit harder. And based off that is because you don't have the selective upgrade paths that Boo's Fury has, where me as a kid who has a little bit of OCD tried to always make all my stats an equal number. So I didn't actually know the technique where everyone just dumped all their stats into just normal physical punching and just one-shot all their enemies until I was an adult and started speedrunning the game. Well, you couldn't actually really do that in this one. There was a few times you'd actually be able to get capsules and level up certain characters the way you wanted them to, but it was never anything groundbreaking. So I think that's where this game it was a little bit, more of a leap from the original Legacy of Goku to this, because, the Legacy of Goku, the original one, not that good of a game. It also ranks pretty low on the list. Not on the bottom 7, fun fact, but it's definitely down there. Yeah, obviously it was such a leap that, this deserving of an 8, and so many people recognize it as a good game. Now we have a tie in second place, and we also have a tie in first place as well. So let's go over, in no particular order, one of the games that came in the top 2 most highly rated games of all time for Dragon Ball. We have Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 2 with a score of 8.1, released in 2006 for the PlayStation 2 and Nintendo Wii. It was developed by Spike. It's a fighting game, and then if you play the Wii version, it's also a motion fighting game. It covers the story of Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball GT, and the movies, and potentially a little bit of what if stuff, I believe. And it belongs to the Budokai Tenkaichi series. This game is very interesting. I remember renting it from Blockbuster when we already owned the first Budokai Tenkaichi and then Budokai Tenkaichi 3, and for whatever reason we never owned the second one. I remember seeing it at Blockbuster when we went once. We rented it, I played it for that weekend. It was awesome. I had a great time with it, and that was when I was like, maybe like 9, 10, and then I never saw anything about it for years. And then when I was a teenager and I had my own expendable income, I remember seeing the Wii version out there, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna buy that. I remember that being fun. Played it on the Wii, finished it, had a great time with it. I also recently got it for the PS2, so I'm excited to experience it again. But this game, it definitely is, I think, the most solid foundation of a Budokai Tenkaichi game that there is out there. Like, I think the overall story mode is handled the best with this one, and I really hope they bring back a lot of elements that they took away from this one for number 3 when they're developing Budokai Tenkaichi 4 right now. Just in the world of the storytelling, like there's so much fun with being able to fly around the map still and doing all those little bits and pieces. I remember having a great time with this game. And the other game tied for second place with the score of 8.1 is Dragon Ball FighterZ. It was released in 2018 for the PS4, Xbox One, Nintendo Switch, and Windows. It was developed by Arc System Works. The genre is a fighting game, and the story is unique. And it doesn't belong to any other series of games. Unfortunately, there's no FighterZ 2, despite the fact that I know a lot of people out there would love another iteration of this game. But I believe it's still currently getting supported now, and hey, it's such a good fighting game that it's now in official fighting game tournaments like EVO. Like it's currently such a good system that it stands up above all other Dragon Ball fighting games as an actual fighting game that requires skill to do. And because of that, I don't like it that much. Personally, I kind of like the simplicity of like a Budokai game over this. I much more enjoy being able to just kind of have a more simple system when I play my Dragon Ball games, but that might just be me. I did really enjoy the story mode. I loved being able to have all the unique interactions with characters. It was very nice. And it is honestly probably the most beautiful Dragon Ball game out there. And again, in no particular order, what we have for the first place game, like highest rated game overall, is Dragon Ball Z Budokai Tenkaichi 3. It has an average score of 8.4. It was released in 2007 for the PS2 and Nintendo Wii. It was developed by Spike. It's a fighting game, again, with motion controls on the Wii. It covers the story of Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball GT, the movies, even some what if stuff and extra game modes. And the series that belongs to is the Budokai Tenkaichi series. Are we surprised this ranked number 1? It tied ranked number 1 with another game. I think you already know what the other game is, but let's talk about this really quick. Budokai Tenkaichi 3 is definitely a game I spent so much time on because there's so many different characters that you play. And that was definitely the biggest selling point for a lot of people. It's just, if there was a Dragon Ball character you wanted to try, you could probably play as them. I remember not liking the story mode as much because as Dragon Ball story modes go, it is kind of one of the most lackluster ways of going about it. I do love the little Goku talking heads with someone when you're selecting the sagas and everything, but the actual gameplay of the story, I felt a bit lackluster, which is a bit unfortunate, but The extra game modes are really good. I had played it on stream recently because I was like excited for Budokai Tenkaichi 4, and I can't remember if it's like the ultimate mode or whatever it is, the one where you like do a little RPG. It's like a dating sim story mode or whatever it is. I remember playing that, and like I tried that again recently. That is just, it's so good. I love it. Obviously, with this game getting so much love and being ranked #1 out of all the different reviews it's ever had before, it's no surprise we're getting a #1 all these many years later. And then the other game that tied for the first spot with a score of 8.4 is Dragon Ball Z Budokai 3. It was released in 2004 for the PS2 with the developer Dimps. It's a fighting game. It covers the Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball GT, and movie stories, where you select your own character and go through the essential part of those stories, and as part of the Budokai series. Personally, if I had to give it to one of these two games, I would lean more towards Budokai 3. I don't know why, it's kind of just a more enjoyable playthrough for me. I love everything about it mechanically, except for the rock, paper, scissors mechanic. That thing can go to hell. That is the worst addition they ever did to a Budokai game. But apart from that, the game itself feels flawless. It is so fun to play. I remember spending so much time on it as a kid. Even when we had Budokai Tenkaichi 3, I remember always going back to Budokai 3 just because I love being able to explore the world as whatever character I picked and being able to level them up like an RPG. It was so entertaining, and I spent so much time on it. And if there was another game they were going to make a sequel for after all these years, I really hope they make another Budokai game. I guess that'll do us for the list here. So again, I only went over the top 3 and bottom 3. Originally, I was going to go over the bottom 7 and top 7. However, there are so many games that are tying those top spots. I think in 7 and 6 and maybe even 4, there's like 4 games that are all tied in those spots. So rather than me losing my voice, again, down below, I'll leave the resources so you can actually see the list that I've gone through and painstakingly made for you. And I hope you like find as much fascination with it as I have. And if there's Dragon Ball games that you haven't played before, I definitely would recommend having a look at the list and saying, oh, this one's ranked really well. I might want to try that. I know I've definitely looked at the list and gone, oh, I didn't know that game ranked so well. I've never actually tried that. I want to try that now. It's also worth mentioning, despite the fact that I didn't actually get to talk about any games that were released just in Japan, this list does include just Japanese releases of games. However, in the top 7 spot, a lot of them were only released in Japan. However, in the top 3, it just seems to be ones that were released everywhere. So yeah, I really hope you check out the list, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, I would appreciate a like. If you want me to make another video like this for a different series, or if you want me to talk about any of these Dragon Ball games more in depth, let me know in the comments. And to see what else I make, if you want to subscribe, that'd be cool too. Obviously, everyone's experience with these kinds of games are unique. Personally, I lean more towards the RPG games. Like if I was to make this list, I think Boo's Fury and Attack of the Saiyans would probably make it in my top 5. If not, even like one of them would probably make it in my top 3. Attack of the Saiyans specifically, that game's amazing. Anyway, I've been SimpleAttack. I appreciate your time, and I'll see you in the next video.